So hi beautiful people, welcome to the first series of Cooking with Architect. Today we're on episode 2 and I got a special guest that will be joining us on Cooking with an Architect. So my special guest today is Rosa Rogina. She's an architect researcher and a program director at LFA. She currently runs the design studio at University of East London and the unit called Unit 8 with her partner Amor. Amongst this, Rosa obtained an MA degree in architecture at the Royal College of Art and also holds a MA Research Architecture degree from Goldsmith. Also, she carried out a research at University of London investigating how can we employ architecture, theory, and practice engaging with the global matters and also concern. And also today, she is our personal chef on Cooking with Architect. So hi, Rosa, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on with us today.
Thank you, Chun-Li. This is super exciting. I have to admit, I'm much more comfortable with talking rather than cooking. So it's an exciting challenge to be taking up today.
Yeah, because I think the cooking element is kind of just a fun part of the show. And I think I was talking to you earlier as well, just talking about how with the Cooking with Architect is focusing on the 5 senses. So you have the hair, smell, touch, see, and also the taste part. And I think the taste part in architecture is always kind of left out. So this is what we are trying to implement today. So what is the dish that you'll be making for us today?
We will be making today a frittata. So a mixture of eggs, and then we will be kind of flavoring it up with lots of different colorful ingredients. So spinach, peppers, feta cheese, and some fresh spring onions. So hopefully a good way to finish up the day.
I'm looking forward to it. I saw the recipe and I was like, oh, I've never had this before. So this is going to be the first time of me ever trying this, which is kind of exciting.
Oh, I have never prepared it myself either. So it's a good challenge.
A good challenge for both of us, which is kind of good. So just going to ask, before we start making the meals, I just want to ask you some questions kind of leading into why did you choose to go within the architecture field within the beginning of your career?
That's a tough one. I think in my case, it was running through the family, and my father is an architect. My whole family is very kind of art and culture minded and very much within that sector and influence. So for me, it was a natural leap to be kind of heading in that direction. Probably it was quite interesting because everybody in my family was much less excited than, other families who didn't have architecture experience within the family. Now I do understand a little bit where that was coming from, but yeah, certainly the decision was kind of growing at this early age.
Because this is the second episode, and I kind of see that with architecture, it's a running theme. It actually kind of stems from your youth. So it's either you were fascinated with buildings or spaces, and for you, it's because you were always surrounded in the environment of architecture. So that kind of pushed you within, I guess, in the architecture field. One thing that I would like to ask as well is you did quite a lot of research within the architecture field, and you kind of stemmed off from, I would say, the traditional architecture, but into more of looking at the issues within the built environment. And what kind of helped or pushed you, per se, or inspired you to go into the research part of architecture?
That's a really good question. So I think I did a very traditional BA course back in Croatia. Then I worked for a couple of years in practice, and then I decided to come to London to study my MA. And I think the difference in between education is quite significant. And the first excitement when I entered Royal College of Art was architecture is not only buildings, and I can do all other plethora of things around it, and using my architectural kind of tools, skills, techniques to have much wider impact. So that was, I guess, the melting pot where I started to think about other ways of practicing architecture, which I think is a theme that then carries on in my practice.
Yeah. And what kind of stuff, what kind of issues inspired you the most when studying and investigating the certain issues? Because I know there's so much problems, and I've said this before on the previous show, is that one quote that I kind of think, and to me, it seems true is that we have doctors for the hospitals for sick people, but I also do believe that architects are doctors for the built environment, right? So we create spaces. And one thing I would say is that architecture does seem to have solved problems that we are currently in. And we sometimes at school, we're taught about the traditional side of architecture. And with your research and with all that you've been doing, I can see that you were stemming off from the traditional side into more or looking at, you say, innovation or finding ways at how we can best solve architecture, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, spaces are created by, you could say, by roofs, walls, floors, but they're also created by people and the way how they use that space, and each person will kind of give its own interpretation of each space. And I think our education teaches us very well how do we design those walls and roofs and floors, but doesn't really teach us how do we engage that more fluid fabric of people who use the space in the very end. And I think that's where I felt my interest was lying, but perhaps the kind of conventional education system didn't really have a supporting mechanism of teaching you those things.
Yeah, I agree with some of the things you're saying, especially just finishing and graduating from university myself. I was in your unit, obviously, Unit 8 at University of East London. I do believe that when I did my part 1, you kind of learned the basics of how to make the building stand up, of course, and how to keep it structured. But I think the community aspect of architecture is sometimes kind of missing, and the social impact that can actually have on the community that's present there, kind of. So I kind of like the fact that you kind of went and explored those issues and how can we probably solve them. Just so we go a little bit further into now the food, should we start, what do you want to start with so far?
I'll do my best not to burn the whole house. But I would recommend we start by putting some oil on our pan, and then we can start adding some ingredients once that. Okay,
so I put the oil inside my pan. So one question I want to ask you while we're making the food is, why did you choose this dish? Because you know the theme of the whole show is, what does architecture mean to you? So what made you choose to make this dish today?
I thought about it quite a lot of time. And actually, I kind of came down to the dish that is relatively simple in its own terms. Because I was trying to think about, how can dish represent different people, how it can represent different cultures. And in a way, I was struggling to find one dish that encapsulates all, because usually kind of dishes are very kind of culture or nation specific. And it's very difficult to say, oh, this is the dish that can represent all the communities of London or something like that. So then I started to think a bit broader about architecture and food. And I remember that Cedric Price, who is one of my favorite architects from the 60s, had this wonderful diagram of explaining the evolution of the city through different sketches of egg. So his argument was that the whole, several thousand-year evolution of cities, you can kind of bring it down to 3 different egg preparing eggs in very different ways. So the ancient city could be represented as a boiled egg, so everything is contained in the kind of hard envelope. Then the industrial city, when the whole industrialization started, could be represented as what I call sunny side up, where you still have the core, but somehow there are these other bits spilling out. And then he was saying that the last kind of third evolution is the scrambled egg, which represents the contemporary city, which doesn't anymore have one nucleus, but is somehow scattered around, a little bit like, we can see London with all sorts of high streets across the whole city. And in a way, I was thinking about it, and I felt that perhaps now, already, 60 years later, we could be thinking of adding another addition to the set of diagrams. And I felt that something that perhaps was not represented in his diagram is this diversity. So in his diagrams, you have one component, which is the egg, and then you just play with it, how it's broken or not broken. But actually, if we are talking about green spaces, if we are talking about, other kind of ecologies and things like that, then I was interested in thinking how we can add all of these things we'll be adding to our frittata today to represent a little bit that kind of bringing the, let's say, nature that was always kind of drawn outside of the city perimeter into it and make it much more complex configuration. Is the add before we go on to the next question?
Yeah,
I suggest we add spinach and we add peppers, and then as we speak, we start mixing and breaking eggs. Does that sound good?
Okay, so I'll just finish that.
Because it is very warm.
And you said peppers, right?
Yes. I recommend you put the fire a bit down.
Okay. I put mine on 6.
Yeah.
And should I just keep stirring it?
Yes.
Okay.
I might put it more down. It just needs to become tender, so it can be actually very low.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just leaning into the community side of just like what you're saying in terms of diversity, and London's very diverse now. Do you think that the buildings that we live in currently is actually fitting for the diversity that we have? Because people have different experiences, people come from different backgrounds. So especially now with the whole pandemic and being closed in spaces, do you believe that the architecture really does help with the space that we live in? Especially, I don't know if you know the Marcus theory, but the top-down structure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So especially now, if you look at that theory and it's talking about how certain, for example, Shoreditch is a good example. It was first built for the middle class, you would say. And then you had a lot of the working class who came in to kind of fill in the factories. But since, I know there's a big talk talking about gentrification within Shoreditch and all this kind of stuff and house prices going up and a lot of communities has been displaced. Do you think this is true throughout the whole of London, or do you just think it's just in certain areas? And do you think buildings are actually designed for diversity?
I think they're not. And it kind of goes back, you can go as far as you want in history. So even the modular of Le Corbusier that everybody references is this perfect man and the drawing of the scale and everything. That's based on a white, very tall European man. So even then, we are talking about measurements of homes that are based on a very kind of one profile of person. And we do reference that as something, throughout history worth mentioning. So I think that kind of division of, or let's say kind of simplifying design to one standard type of person is very evident throughout history as much as it's today. And I think before we were talking much more about, that kind of discrepancy between two genders, but actually you're absolutely right. When we talk about London and different communities and backgrounds, people use spaces in very different ways. In some communities, kitchen is kind of hidden space where one person cooks, whereas for other communities, kitchen is the central place of the home where everybody gathers and, kind of does that process collectively. So in a way, I think there is very little flexibility at the moment to adapt your place to your own kind of way of using the space.
Yeah. Especially like you were saying that using the whole like the human scale, and especially now, but it's still kind of being taught. The problem is that it's still kind of being taught within architecture school, and I think innovation needs to come into place. Don't you think that maybe we still can use principles of it, but it needs to be changed. Innovation needs to evolve, especially in the time and the places that we live in now, and even thinking about the well-being of our minds and how we work and how we live.
Yeah, I do agree that there has to be some sort of, standards, and where do you, start from. But I think things like, even if you look at COVID crisis and how we were forced to change our living environment into, a little bit of working, a little bit of living, a little bit of everything within your four walls, which kind of show that we do need apartments that are able to adapt. So it might be that, you start with standards, but actually there is a system of very easily kind of rules that you very easily can somehow transform the space if you wish to.
Yeah.
For long term.
Yeah, because especially now that you're saying, now that it's transforming, because a lot of people, and like London flats, they're very cramped and small, and people will have like a family of 3, and then during COVID, they might not have an outdoor or a green space to actually enjoy or to engage. So they will, it's either they're left to go to the park, which is social distancing. There's not much of the park, it's very small for them to like play around. So yeah, I think, like you were saying, spaces and with communities, I think a lot of innovation needs to take place. And with the research that you've done as well, because I know you've done like quite a lot of research into like different stuff, issues, especially like global issues as well. From all the research you've done, is there anything that you've come across, do you think, that can really help with communities?
Before I answer, I will pour a bit of milk and my pepper, salt, and garlic into the egg bit. No, I forgot half of the question, but I think you have asked me if through my research and kind of studying, I have found other ways of, sorry, what was it? Engaging with architecture.
Yeah, that you think we can help with or solve the issue of like the disconnect between the two.
Yeah, I think what was really useful for me when studying, and I don't know if that answers your question fully, but I'll do my best, is we were given a residency in Wembley as a architecture studio. And interestingly, we were supposed to go there, occupy the space, and run what we call a civic university within the community. Okay. And that was the moment where I felt I don't have skills for that. So, up to that point, I was taught to, draw plan sections, and nobody really taught me in architecture school how to run a university or how to run a community event somewhere. And I think it was that kind of face-to-face with reality moment where it became really interesting for me, because I did understand that actually, part of it is definitely designing and working, in your own kind of space. But as much or even more important is to be out there and kind of communicate your ideas. And the other thing I very easily through that process understood is that not everybody reads architecture or is able to kind of understand our drawings in a way. So like just thinking about also being mindful about that when we do present our work or even talk about it, that it has to be something that is, understandable for all, not just to the industry.
Yeah. Even you saying that in terms of presentation, because this was a recurring question that came up yesterday, and actually I would like to ask you this. Do you think within architecture school, especially your part 1, you're not really taught about presentation skills as much? You kind of just taught the basic standard of how to draw the plan, how to make the model. Do you think there needs to be more focus on and how we present our work, especially to people who, if you're going to present to communities, so that they understand the process and also they can have their input within what we design?
Yes. And I think it's almost like a two strands of importance of presentation. One is a very kind of sensitive, explanatory, or even a consultation process with, final tenants, community, wider stakeholders, whatsoever, which you need to be able to communicate things beyond plans and sections because not everybody can read those. But then there is also second part, and none of those two are taught anywhere, which is about pitching your work. So in order to win projects, apart from being a really good designer, you also need to be a really good salesperson.
Yeah.
And sometimes on a few occasions, I remember a few students were, like the night before the final presentation, they were drawing and like not sleeping. And I mean, the best advice I think I have ever given was, it's you have to sell yourself and your project, which of course you need to believe and you need to be sure it's, good and everything. But it's almost more about preparing that presentation than about, finalizing the last detail on page 49. So, and the best presentations were always from students, not just from our unit, but from other units, where you have seen that the person slept the night before, which is really important, and architects tend to forget that a lot.
But I think
eggs, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Eggs go inside the pan now?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I would put feta as well. And we can leave it on the pan for a bit, but then it has to go to the oven.
Did I miss out any ingredients? The green onions?
Don't worry. I put them at some point, but very recently. You can. I think we were supposed to put them earlier, but because we will cook it in more, it doesn't really matter.
I'll put them in now. And put the feta cheese on top now?
Yes.
Okay. Practices, we need to have more. I know some practices do this already, but I think we need to have more engagement or events where we actually talk to communities and ask what they need or what they want in their spaces. Because very often we kind of guess like, oh, they were like this, they were like that, and not really communicating and asking them for themselves what they would actually enjoy in their space. I think that would be nice. And especially, I know that you're the head programmer at LFA, and it's kind of like celebrating architecture throughout of London. And some of the things you do are like installations, pavilions, like structures and stuff that kind of go across London. What is kind of like the hope? What is LFA trying to try to bring to the community with these structures? Is that the best way to do it?
I think, well, hopefully a lot. I think the team is very small, but has a real commitment to change and impact throughout the city. I think in the playing field we are, what helps us to negotiate is the fact that we are temporary.
Yeah.
So often we would speak with councils or we would speak with landowners and we will be like, oh, can we test this? But we're just a 1 month long festival, so we'll kind of go away at some point. And that's always a good leverage point for people to allow you to do things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. So I think a good example is in 2008, we did a project on Exhibition Road, where we tested how it would be if you close the road in between all the kind of well-known museums in London for 2 days that is just for pedestrians. And back then, it looked something as completely impossible, but actually in a way it was that event that then triggered wider discussion, and the road is now shared surface. And equally this year we were back there with a series of installations that explore how ecology and biodiversity could be brought to the road. So I think in a way they are all installations and they're temporary for us, I guess there are three really important components. One is to test and be relevant. So we would never do a pavilion that is just a pavilion, if that makes sense. It has to have a much kind of deeper purpose and role. Why is it there? Then secondly, it's about platforming new talent. So also using those projects as mechanisms of almost like discovering new architectural talent. And as you know, it's super hard to win a first commission of any kind in London. So those type of projects, hopefully, help the practices. And third is the legacy. So kind of seeing whether there is a way that with those type of small scale, but hopefully high impact work, we can then, leverage something in the future and actually leave a lasting change. So that's more or less the idea. But broader for the festival, I think another thing we are trying to do really hard is to kind of think about democratizing the debate around architecture and just kind of bringing it to much wider audience of kind of beyond the industry, where people do participate in that discussion of, how the city should look like.
Yeah, you've literally answered my two other questions that I was going to ask you, which is actually really great, because that means that is what it's all about. Because very often, sometimes you just create a structure and say for it to look pretty, but it needs to be more in depth. Was it trying to show to the public? Was it trying to portray to them? Was it trying to teach us as well? Especially you were saying about ecology. Ecology is a big thing, because I know, like one of my projects, bees is one thing that is not really focused or incorporated into architecture. And how can we use our architecture to actually better the environment that's surrounding us? Not only just us as people, but we also have the clients which are bees, butterflies, ants, little birds. Those are also clients with architecture, because we're actually invading their space too. Absolutely. I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So we need to find ways how they can re-inhabitate in these places as well. And maybe this is a long-going discussion, is how can we also look at our secondary clients, because they are also important, and they're also important for our health and the whole ecosystem. Otherwise we wouldn't even be here as well, and able to eat certain foods. And pollen as well, bees are so important for pollen that a lot of people don't think about, but yeah, it's really, really important. And it kind of just leads to my other question as well, is do you think we still have a long way to go in acknowledging climate change within our buildings? Because I know this is an ongoing topic, and it's starting to rise questions in terms of zero carbon buildings, and using materials that are less harmful to the environment. But do you think we still have a long way to go, or is there a longer discussion that we need to kind of have to get to the place that we need to be?
I think we have definitely started, but I think we are very, very far from where we should have been at this point. I think when I compare, especially education, to how, at least in my perspective, education looked back 7-8 years. When I was studying in London, there is definitely much more focus on, environment, ecology, etc. But I would argue not enough still. I think the profession is very focused on material and the performance of the building. At the moment is less concerned about the footprint we leave with bringing materials and everything that happens before the building, but equally with everything that happens after the building is constructed, we don't really give any thought. So in a way, the key will be, once we figure out how we can change human behavior through design of space. So one thing is that, the material of the building saves energy, but actually the biggest consumption is the user itself. So how, by design, we can trigger people to be more environmentally minded, I would say, is probably one of the next steps in that journey of achieving all the net zero goals.
I think, like you were saying, is actually a large discussion as well, because if we're designers and most of the buildings is kind of like self-built and built by people who are not architects, so even if we do teach architects to think about these kind of things, materials, and how does it get to the site and what is it made from, that means we need to start teaching communities about these materials too. So it needs to go further than just university, but maybe like high school, and talking about where materials come from, and like concrete, how, you know, like all these little things. So that means it's a wider discussion, and even in community engagement, we can teach them about materials and how to make materials. That will be kind of like good, because I think it's just a lack of knowledge that people don't know that it's a lot. It's loads of little small elements that kind of add up to this big element, which is like climate change, I guess.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And those kind of things that at the moment we're evaluating the kind of carbon footprint of the material based on the material itself, but we're looking very little of, you know, where is it coming from, how much effort, you know, it has taken, you know, to bring it here. Equally with things like, I don't know, the whole rubbish of UK and Europe that all goes to China and Malaysia, where everything gets recycled, you know, like these kind of things that if you don't watch documentaries about climate change, you would never discover those. And I think in a way we are kind of at that tipping point where unless we do something, the whole planet is in quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, and I think one thing as well, your unit 8 was focusing this year was water shortage as well. And not even architecture field, but it's also within fashion as well, like jeans. I didn't know that jeans take a lot of water in the making of the process. And I watched a documentary that a whole sea dried up because they used it for the making of jeans. And I was like, wow, just for normal jeans that you wear just down the road and you probably chuck it away like 2 months away, literally dried up a whole sea, like a whole like...
I mean, those figures are scary. The one I can remember is that I think, and again, don't quote me on this, is that an average person in this world consumes, and I will explain what consumes mean in a second, around 300 liters of fresh water every day, which kind of counts your showering, you know, drinking water, etc. But it also counts if you eat vegetables, how much water was needed to produce that vegetable you eat. So it's around 300 average person. And then in Western Europe is 3,000 liters of water daily per person, which is absolutely shocking. And it's just the way how we, you know, behave, because at the moment in majority of houses and apartment blocks, we use exactly same water for flushing our toilet and drinking, which is not a sustainable way to go forward. So it's those kind of things where I do think our industry has a crucial impact. And a massive chunk of the whole carbon footprint is coming from the built environment industry. So.
Wow. So that means we need to change, like you're saying, change our mindset and how we design. So that means even the buildings that we create, we need to think about how can we facilitate and also harvest water from just like the air, from moisture from the air, or even recycling, like, you know, wash machine water, dish. We used to wash your dishes and stuff. Just those small things to like wash our toilets. Because if that's happening, that means if we in Europe have water shortage, and in the whole world, where are we going to get water from? Because that means we need to be more wise. Even with like the rainwater, that we need to harvest that better, because that's like free water that's coming to us, and which has kind of in a way gone through kind of a process of condensation, kind of like a little bit of a way of like recycling, and we're getting it for free, but we don't take advantage of it. And I think in Europe, that's one thing we're kind of lacking. We don't take advantage of small things of that. Whereas third world countries, they kind of take more advantage of that by recycling their water and harvesting rainwater. But do you think there's a way we need to start thinking about designing architecture that can harvest water? Do you know that like any innovations, or that we could possibly start looking at and thinking about in better improving the way we design?
Yeah, I think so. And that's what I was referring a little bit as well when we were talking about kind of spilling into public space as well, and learning from, informal kind of, let's say, unofficial architects, And I think, we as Western Europeans deal with water in a very specific and inefficient way. And I do think looking at other continents is a way to kind of see, especially from the developing world, how these people who have much less water per capita, use it much more sustainably. So I think, and in a way, sometimes architects can shy off from designing water filtration systems because they're like, oh, and we are not ecologists and we are not biologists and we are not engineers. But actually, if we are designing spaces that people use in their everyday, then it's fundamental that we get those things right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And especially with architecture, I feel like I would say to people that it's like one of the best, I don't know if it's biased because I study architecture, but I feel like it's one of the best courses to learn because it's so broad. It teaches you so much and it really expands your mind into designing in all fields because you really can adapt what you learn here. Like you've done architecture, you're now into like research and now you're looking at how can you do that pavilions at LFA. So I feel like it's such a broad course that we can actually develop more than just buildings. Because we're actually looking at the minds of people as well, and we need to start thinking about those kind of things. And one thing I wanted to ask you is that do you feel like there's a disconnect, especially since the pandemic, do you feel like there's a disconnect between not public space, but our outdoor spaces and our indoor spaces? Do you think it can really affect the social impact on, I don't know if I'm phrasing this properly, but it's kind of affect the social impact on communities? Because what I noticed is that during the pandemic, we're so busy doing all these other things that we're not actually connected to the community and the people that surround us, even not being connected to like our next door neighbor or to the person who lives next door to us, because we're all so busy, we're all just in and out, but there's no connection between our landscape, our public spaces, and our interior spaces. Because in Venice, I would say that there's not much green spaces, but they found a way to make their green spaces. That's on their windowsill. So that's their garden. That's their way of escaping. But I feel like in London, not everyone has the privilege to even a balcony. So do we need to start looking at countries across the world, like Venice, for example, who are actually innovating and kind of creating their own gardens at their windows, and to kind of connect ourselves to the outdoors and inside, kind of this connection between the two?
I think you said lots of really important things there. One thing to kind of start in the order, I think what the pandemic has shown, and let me just check the time. I think the pandemic has shown the most like inequalities there are in between, different people in relation to where they live and how much they have. And actually the big lack of green spaces across many boroughs. And as I'm sure you're aware, there are local councils that at the moment are taking more and more green space to build more kind of high-end residential buildings on them. So there is a fundamental problem there in terms of access to those resources that are not equal to all. But then secondly, I do think with the design as well, lots of buildings are designed in a way that don't really facilitate that in any way on its plot, whether it's, no balconies, no shared green spaces. There is a significant lack of those as well. And something that I always think in relation to how different cultures occupy spaces, and it's really interesting that you mentioned Venice, because Venice is definitely not the place where it's easy to suddenly have massive fields of lavender or I don't know which kind of other greenery. but actually people do find their own ways to kind of create those little oases. And I was always, especially with Victorian housing in London, a little bit disappointed how the front gardens are never ever used. And I don't know whether that also kind of dates back in terms of kind of cultural behaviors. But, you know, if those Victorian streets, and I lived in one of those previously, were in Lisbon or anywhere else, I'm sure they would look very, very different. So I think that there is potential to, and I think it's important for architects to kind of think of how we can reactivate some of those pockets of spaces, but then equally, how can we make sure we campaign that access to green spaces is equal for all, in a way, that everybody in the kind of the closest perimeter has that.
Yeah. And you, like you saying that as well, it's kind of creating that mini oasis, and how you see the culture in the UK, they don't really use their front gardens, which is kind of true. It's not everybody actually plants flowers or take the time. And I think maybe as consumers, we're too busy and we're consuming too much sometimes, that we kind of forget that oasis, that time to escape. And I think, do you think sometimes maybe not all the blame can go on to designers or architects for spaces, but maybe it can also go on to the consumers, the users of the spaces. So example, in Barcelona, the grid pattern within Barcelona, it was originally made to have not an actual square, but you're supposed to have the front houses, and then you were supposed to have gardens that go down each street of the middle of the grids. But because the users and the consumers of wanting to be in the city at all times, trying to make more money, trying to facilitate more people, they kind of scrap that whole idea. And now you could say that with for example, the egg is kind of back to square one of the hard-boiled egg. It's very dense. Yeah, and very just like dense, I guess you would say traditional, but it's kind of, you forget about the wellness and the outdoor spaces. So do you think us as consumers is equally the problem as well?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where I was going to, but I didn't realize, with the whole front garden argument. Because one of the first things, we were living on floor 1, and I was like, why cannot we take our table outside and have breakfast down there? Well, A, because there are bins there, which is another thing that we as a city didn't solve well at all. But the second one was, but nobody does it really in the street. So, it's not like socially acceptable for us to, have breakfast or, wine in the evening down. And I think that there are lots of missed opportunities like that, because if we suddenly activated, it's a little by little in each front garden, but actually if you count all the front gardens in London and further, I'm sure it's a pretty significant open air space that could be a small oasis, as you have explained it in Venice.
It's even like you were saying, the bins. I think when we design as well, we don't think about little things like that, of how can we hide our bins so it's not like this big green bin just like standing in front of our doors. We need to think about little things like that kind of make architecture beautiful, and also maybe give the opportunity for people to want to sit outside in their front garden and actually use it. But I think, like you were saying, it was all about the mindset and the culture that we kind of live in, that maybe we need to start teaching people to get out of that culture. So one thing I know that in the olden days with architecture, they kind of controlled how you use a space. So it's either they will have like bolted down seats, or everything's made out of concrete and there's a certain way you have to walk. Do you think maybe we can use those older principles to kind of teach consumers that the space can also be used like this?
Yeah, no, that's a really good suggestion. And it would be like so nice that with your flat, you almost get like a dummy book of, how could you, it sounds silly, but if you're not an architect, you don't really see those like creative ways of, just changing your space, no? And that, on your terrace, you can create whatever you want, a small plastic swimming pool, or, a greenhouse or whatsoever. So I think in a way, if there was a way to kind of portray those scenarios to people, I'm sure they would become more creative. But yeah, I think there is lots of scope, and certainly, as you say, not all the blame goes to architects, but we have lots of things to improve as well.
Do you think food is a good way to heal communities and to bring communities together? Because even with, like we're saying about public space and outdoor spaces, maybe we need more spaces for food, for planting food, because food shortage is a real thing that's currently going on. And maybe we need to find ways that people who can't actually afford food, they can go outside and actually pick up a zucchini from the local, the community garden, or they can go and get some carrots or something. So maybe we need to start thinking about not only consuming in terms of how we live there, but maybe how we consume in other ways, like the way we eat. Because London's so expensive to live in. It would be nice to be able to get some food, fresh food, for free as well, and not go to like your local Sainsbury's that have to pay so much money for carrots or something.
Yeah, probably carrot from China that is wrapped in 3 layers of plastic and 100%. I think, and to kind of pick up first your other point around, power of food. I do think that regardless of your education, background, gender, religion, everybody, even myself, knows how to cook, or at least something, So it's a little bit like, we are all doing it in our own way. And I often think with events or initiatives or anything that involves that cooking and kind of meal sharing in public space, it's a really strong bonding tool. And I don't think it's a coincidence that lots of students also use that kind of idea in their projects, because it is truly something that connects people. And especially since we're still kind of not yet there to be in a position where cooking is perceived equally on both sides of gender division. It is something still perceived as very much predominantly women-led. It is also a nice way to be empowering women to kind of go out there and meet other kind of neighbors or locals on the basis of something that everybody, even if they don't speak same language, they can share tasting of something very delicious.
Yeah. Oh, and that also leads to the other question, like you're saying, of tasting. So with the show Cooking with Architecture, like I said earlier, is that we are kind of focusing on the taste element of the 5 senses within architecture. And I feel like the taste element is kind of pushed aside when making. So we mainly focus on like maybe the smell. You walk into this room, you can smell the fresh paint, the concrete, you can hear the sound of the echoing, or when you touch the wall, it has like a rough texture, and the feeling of how this environment or your surroundings make you feel. But I feel like the taste part sometimes can be missing. And with like Cooking with Architecture, my element is maybe the whole making of the food and be able to taste it and experience it within the 4 walls. So I wanted to know, what does taste mean to you? Is your meal an example, or your dish an example of what architecture tastes like? Or I don't know how you would interpret what taste in architecture means.
This is a very tough question. I won't pretend I have a perfect answer. When you first mentioned the kind of concept of architecture and taste, to me, that's the probably most subjective sense of them all. And if you ask people what do they hear or what do they sense by touching, or what do they see in a building, will be relatively kind of on the same scope of answers one would expect. But I think the taste bit is probably, because we haven't thought about it to that extent, would be the most abstract one. I haven't tried to think of a building in the sense of how does it taste, And I'm not sure whether I would do it by tasting food within that building or simply trying to, I don't know, compare the feeling of being in that space to a feeling that maybe like certain food can give me. I don't know, maybe that's the way to formulate it. So if I'm, I don't know, in a really kind of cozy, I'm thinking of, like a really cozy, positive building that maybe I will then say, it's a marshmallow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then somebody else might not find it comfortable, and then they will say, oh, it's very bitter because, I don't know, it's, it doesn't have enough windows. No, I'm completely kind of picking on this one as I go, but I think there is quite a bit of scope there to think about it. How do you connect? Because it's true, it's the only sense that is disconnected in a way of kind of explaining and sensing architecture, because obviously you won't kind of taste it literally, but
yeah, you're not going to go into a building and start licking the walls. That'd be very, very weird to go and start doing that. But yeah, I like the way you said it, is maybe it's comparing the piece of architecture to a food, of like, or maybe it can be compared to an emotion as well, kind of like tied together. So you're like, I will say that buildings also facilitate memories and experiences. And especially with cooking, you look at chefs, they always say that, oh, I remember going to my mom's kitchen, remember my grandma cooking this. I remember like when I walk, or they walk into a room, like, oh, this reminds me of like what my aunt's kitchen used to look like. And it brings back so much memories. And that's why they designed their restaurant in a certain way. Because I watched like a lot of food. Food is one thing that I used to watch like a lot. And they always relate what they kind of make back to their childhood and being in a certain room and the atmosphere. So maybe taste could be a memory.
I do think so, yeah.
Yeah. Of what it reminds you of. Maybe it could be a good memory, maybe it could be a bad memory, but it could also be, like you were saying, a memory. When I walk in that room, it makes me feel like it tastes a bit like sour, like a lemon, so I don't want to really go in there. It doesn't really give me good memories, but it gives me sour memories. Which...
Yeah, and memories are super subjective. No, it's our own kind of unconscious selection of moments we kind of reference and pull back. So in a way, it would offer that variety. So probably people will have, as I said, very different answers to how a space tastes, because they will be pulling all sorts of different memories from their unconscious part of the brain.
Yeah, that is very true. And maybe we need to, but the same thing, it doesn't matter like how we design. Maybe we need to kind of, I don't think we can really control the memories that are kind of created, but maybe we can do our best to make sure that it's somehow good, I guess, with who lives there. But is it ready now? Mine is a bit brown.
I think probably we are now on 25. I would say so. Mine is brownish, but not. I think so. What do you think, Chun-Li?
Let me see. Mine's kind of brown, but let me turn mine off just in case. So
okay, I will switch it off.
Yeah.
Maybe we can. I'll just wait 2 minutes.
We can take it out and maybe put it on the stove top and then.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, it looks really good.
You see?
I'm looking forward to this.
And elaborate than it really is.
Pardon?
It looks more complicated and elaborate than it is.
Wow. And it smells really good too. Oh, okay. So just before, let's answer one more question and then we can go into serve and then dishing this out so they cool a little bit. So the last question, not the last question, but the other question I wanted to ask is, what is like the one thing that you would say you love about architecture?
The thing I like the most, I think it's that it's the impact on people, because I think by the way you design things, you have power of changing human behavior. So in a way, if you refurbish or indicate that through refurbishment of a house, let's say, if you indicate to a person how that front garden, to kind of use that as a reference again, can be used differently, and even like small things, as you said, how the bins can be placed nicer. So it's those small things. Of course, we can build super efficient buildings. We can, build new towns, villages, and do all sorts of things across the world. But to me, it's those little changes that then will, make people use their either the whole flat or a specific corner in a very different way. Yeah, I think that, and that's really empowering to also then, see how that impacts somebody else and that you have that power and ability to do.
Yeah. I think it's the impact part as well. It's just like being able to possibly change someone's life for the good, just because you thought about such a small detail that really somehow helped them so much. You decide to put a tiny nook, and then they'll be able to put their desk there. It's like, oh my gosh, this saved me so much more space. So I think is that the impact that you're able to have on people. I think that's quite nice, because I think architecture is one thing that has such a great impact on people, because we spend so much time in them. So much time in architecture, like in buildings, is ridiculous. Even when we go to work, we probably go outside for 2 hours out of the whole day, but majority of the day is like within the building. So is the impact that we can have. And sometimes bad architecture obviously have bad impacts, and good design architecture has good impact. So should we start? Mine's kind of like going down now. I don't know, should we wait a little bit longer?
No, I think it's fine. Just watch out, it's very warm, the handle, at least mine.
Okay. Yeah.
So you recommend now to cut it, right? So we show what we prepared.
Yeah, we can cut it. Let me get a knife. A tiny knife should be okay, right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to find something. I can take it out.
And we get these.
Okay, the texture feels about right.
See. Oh, okay.
The trick will now be to take it out without completely destroying. Ah.
I got like a spatula.
Yeah, here you go. Here is mine.
Oh, that looks so good. I'm wondering if I feel like yours looks more fluffy than mine.
I think it looks better. Mine is not that brown.
Or maybe I overcooked mine.
It has to be brown.
Okay, let me try get this out if I can somehow. Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited to try it. Let me show you guys. I put mine in a heart-shaped plate to show that I love frittata. Oh, that looks really good. Ooh. You can put us together. I'm show everyone.
Excellent.
Nice. Okay, let's try it. So pardon?
I just leaked on my computer the free. Yeah, that's it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can you get a fork? So the last question I guess I will ask you for now is, which is the meaning of your show, is what does architecture mean to you?
What does architecture mean to me?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. Well, it obviously plays a fundamental part of my life.
Yeah.
And the kind of love-hate relationship I'm having on day-to-day with architecture. But to me, it means a lot. And in a way, it's way of both living, but also working and thinking. So it's something that, for me, doesn't stop when I close my computer or, go out of the office. Something that is very much embedded in the everyday. And as we discussed, that the power of an ability for, changing people's life, whether it's with something super significant or something as tiny, is the thing that, keeps me going and keep practicing and testing different ways of using architecture. And to me, that's the most important thing. For me, architecture is, as I think we both agreed, goes beyond building. And I think it's almost more important to think about it as a set of skills and tools rather than the outcome. And then those set of skills can be, applied in building buildings. It can be applied in government to change policies. It can be applied in, environmental sciences. So it's almost like a kit of tools that then, you kind of, as an architect, you hold it in your little bag, but you can do all sorts of different things. And that's what I think is important. We should be thinking of where our actions are the most relevant. So whether building a building will make a change or actually going kind of up the pyramid and making a change on the policy level will have an impact, or probably both. But if that's probably it for me, architecture. Okay, I have the answer. Is that toolbox of skills and tactics that you apply in different spaces and places.
Wow, I love your answer. I really love it. Yeah, because architecture is definitely more than just buildings. It really does go further out than just the four walls that we live in. And I love the concept of the food that you chose as well, of that is more than just the density of the cities, but is very diverse. And especially when we look at London as well, it's very mixed of different cultures, religions, all sorts. So I quite like it. I tasted it. It tastes really good.
Yay!
I like the cheese as well. And the whole concept of the egg. And as well, which is very interesting. I've never seen this before, but the egg has a mini structure in it. I don't know if yours has it.
Yeah, I think it's because of the way how we cooked it.
Oh,
because we didn't fry it, we cooked it basically for.
Yeah.
It has that sponginess, no?
Yeah, it's really nice. First time. I will definitely be making it again. So, just to wrap up the show now, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for joining and all your wonderful answers. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope the audience also enjoyed it too. So just to end the show, thank you everyone for watching and joining me and Rosa today on the show and just listening to the conversation that we had about what architecture is. Also, I will be putting information about the LFA, who Rosa is, and her details, your Instagram. Do you have Instagram handles that you would like to say, or would you like me to just put them in the description for you?
Yeah, it's Rosa Rogina all together, but we can put it in.
Okay. So I'll put her details down below so that you can also get in contact with her if you have information or you just want to learn more about architecture. So I will do that for you. Again, thank you for joining me on Cooking with an Architect, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.